Good day, everybody, and welcome to our April 3rd Tuesday at 3 webcast, Spring Cleaning Your Files. My name is Alan Falcon. I'm the CEO and pragmatic evangelist, if you will, here at Cumulus Global. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day and week to join us here for the live webcast or to be watching this content on demand. We appreciate your interest in the topic and are hoping that this time will be time well spent for you and your team. Before we get into the content of the session today, a couple of things. As always, the audio is muted. This prevents background noise from interfering with the session. So if at any point in time you have a question or a comment, along the top or right-hand side of your screen, you'll see some icons. One of them opens the questions window. That's the best way to ask a question or make a comment because it alerts me that it's out there and I can track to make sure we've responded to them all before we leave at the end of the session. We do have time for Q&A, but we'll try to answer questions along the way as well. As with all of our webcasts, the session's being recorded. It generally takes about 24 hours to get it up on the website. We'll send you an email once it's there. Feel free to share it. Also, you'll note at the start of every webcast, I talk about our resources. So here's a look at our resource center. We have a number of different types of resources we make available to small and mid-sized businesses. A lot of it technology related, some of it more general business activity and information that we think might be helpful to you. But this, at this time, I want to highlight a couple of specific resources. This month, we actually have 2 Coffee and Cloud webcasts happening. That's our shorter webcast, where when you register to watch it live or you view the recording, you have the option of having us send you a Dunkin' or a Starbucks card to cover the cost of your coffee. Our first session was held on April 11th. That recording is available on demand. It's Managing IT Inflation, where we talk about the way you and your company can avoid some of the increases in costs we're starting to see with information technology and services and strategies you can have long-term to get the most dollars out of your investment and operate most efficiently. Coming up this Friday, we have a second one, which is cyber protection for real estate agents and brokers. And while we're focusing there because we see a large uptick in cyber attacks specifically directed at those individuals and small businesses, the content here is really good for any small business as well. And that, webcast is really an outcropping of a blog post we did, which is listed in the center of the screen, Cyber Attacks on Real Estate Agents and Brokers Victimized Clients, where we're seeing compromised accounts and very well done email and domain impersonation attacks known as business email compromise. Basically, criminals pretending to be real estate agents and having their clients wire money. And of course, the money's not going for the deposit on the house, it's going to the criminals, and it creates quite the business and legal mess as well as a financial mess for everyone involved. And so we also have a second blog post on business email compromise. It doesn't get the headlines and it's not seen as the most common. It is actually the costliest type of cybercrime, even more so than ransomware, which still grabs the media attention. And these types of cyber attacks are part of other security trends that can impact your business, and we've got a blog post there as well. To help you mitigate it, we've got 2 assessments that we're offering. The first we're currently offering for free. It's a rapid security assessment designed to help you reduce your risk and step up your security while protecting your budget. And so the assessment actually starts with a survey that takes 3 or 4 minutes only of your time. We then do some additional research and we'll get back to you with a report identifying gaps in recommended steps and estimated costs to protect you and your business from the most common and the most prevalent types of cyber attacks facing small businesses today. So it's not a comprehensive security audit. We're looking for specific things that we can put in place to give you the most protection value, the most protection for the least amount of money, as it were. We have a more in-depth assignment around email security, reliability, and compliance. This is a paid service, but we can talk to you about that as well, particularly if you're in an industry that has industry compliance or regulatory compliance requirements. We can help you make sure you meet those. So some great resources. On the left, it's our Coffee and Cloud series. The middle is the blog. And then on the website, our rapid security assessment and our email security, reliability, and compliance assessment are all available to you. That said, let's dive into the content and the topic here today, which is spring cleaning your files. And really, when we talk about spring cleaning your files, we're take a step back. We're really talking about what's your file service, right? And historically, with small businesses, we've had a computer somewhere. Maybe it was someone's desktop, or it was a server in the computer room or the closet, if you will, or under someone's desk. That was the file server. And now with the cloud and things happening in data centers and hosted environments, our file service may not be so cut and dry. In fact, it shouldn't be. Most of us have multiple cloud services. We'll get that into that in a few minutes. And so we're really looking at what do you want from a file service, and really understanding that before you do your spring cleaning, so that when you're done cleaning, where you want to be. It's not just a matter of deleting old files and archiving and moving things around. It's really about a strategy that's going to help improve your team's ability to work efficiently and productively. So what do we want in a file service? Obviously, a place to store our files, but we want it to be secure. We want it organized. We want it accessible to everyone. And today, everyone means not just people in your office. It could be workers who are working from home or remotely. And accessible can be not just from a PC or a laptop. It should be accessible from tablets, smartphones, browsers, other devices. We want the data to be protected. Clearly, we just went through a whole bit, number of security issues and information to help you with that. So we want it to be protected, which also means recoverable in the event of a disaster or a mistake. And it should be searchable. You have to be able to find what you have. And searchability and organization are related, but they are two separate things, and we'll chat about that in just a bit. So we talk about storage space and file service. There are really two roles that historically exist and still exist, and we don't see them going away. And some will argue that there's really no need for personal space, that everything should be shared. But culturally, and for many businesses, particularly businesses that individuals may work on confidential items or other people's intellectual property, personal space could be appropriate and often is. And I'm not sure culturally we'll win the battle of removing it anyway. So when we look at personal space, what are we talking about? We're talking about a space for individual work. This is where I do my work that I'm not expected to be sharing with anyone while I'm working on it, although I might share the results. And typically, this personal space is either local to the device, my laptop, for example, or personal workspace in whatever file services we have. And ideally, that would be a centralized file service, and we'll talk about that, as opposed to me going off and picking my own cloud service, either paid or even worse, consumer grade, and doing my personal work there. And because it's personal space by design, in most systems, I, as the end user, have control over my sharing and permissions. So I get to say who sees what, who can make changes, who can edit, who can view, etc. Now, well, it's very convenient for individuals to have personal workspace. There are a couple of issues. Work that needs to be shared may not be visible to others. And more often than not, that work may not actually be stored in protected locations. And so we'll see organizations, for example, set up directories on laptops that get backed up or that get synced into the cloud. And when people are doing work in their personal space, they don't remember or they choose not to save it in that location. It's somewhere else on the laptop that isn't covered by that backup, right? Or you've got a file service that you roll out to the company and someone's doing their personal work in a personal Dropbox account, for example. So you want it stored in a protected location because it's any work is work of the company, any work of an employee is work of the company, and you want it to be able to be visible to others when and if needed. A shared space, same type of space. However, it's designed for group work, shared visibility and access, not just not just when you're finished with it, but when you're working on it as well. And therefore, it's best if it's centrally located. And here, administrators control the sharing. So the IT department or department level administrators will really decide who can view, edit, add, delete, change, and modify permissions on that workspace. And so it's really treated more of as a company asset. And here's where the model of the traditional file server comes into play, because historically your IT department would manage the permissions on your file server. Now, if you move those shared spaces up into cloud file services, your IT administrators are can and will still control sharing there. Okay, now in a shared environment, one of the risks you have is that work may not be secured properly. Permissions are very important. And it may not be easy to locate. We'll talk about how we solve both of those challenges as we move forward through the session here. But diving into what we're looking for in a file service, looking at secure, there's an obvious issue about physical access, right? And granted, we're a cloud provider, and we do encourage people to leverage cloud for file services. And we can talk about that when we get in, when we talk about access, accessibility and things of that nature and why. But there's a physical access component to security, particularly if it's on a laptop or on a server or a storage device in your office. There's also the issue of your user's identity and controlling access management. And this is really where you will need a holistic approach that says, I know for each employee where the data is that they need to use and how they're going to access it and what their level of access might be. And particularly when you move into cloud services, managing and having consistent identity and access management across systems is fairly important. And so we talk about security, aside from can I log in, can I get access to it, it's what permissions do I have? And depending on the environment, and they'll use different terms for basically the same thing. Sometimes it's viewer, contributor, content manager, super admin, whatever. But effectively it's, can you add documents? Can you edit them? Can you comment in them without being able to edit them? Do you have the ability to delete files or folders? Do you have the ability to organize, move files and folders around within a certain framework? And do you have the authority to manage the permissions of other users in the environment? And you'll want to set those, and you want those set consistently across all of the environments where you have files. And it's great then, particularly in the shared space, is part of security to have a defined schema and understand whether those permissions are going to be assigned or organizationally or based on a role. And organizationally tends to follow departments and traditional corporate hierarchies. Role-based can either be role within the company or maybe your role as a team member on a project. And part of the permission systems that we look for and that we look at, whether it's on-premise or it's in any of the cloud service, is how those permissions inherited as you create subfolders and put files in a subfolder hierarchy? Or do you have the ability to change them specifically for a folder and its contents or for specific files? The other aspect of security that often gets overlooked is encryption. And it's important to know that your files are encrypted not only at rest, but also in motion. And that's wherever they're located. So at this point in our evolution of IT, if you have a PC or a laptop or a tablet, the files that are stored on that device, even temporarily, should be encrypted when they're sitting on the disk. And when that data moves from that laptop up into the cloud or over a VPN into a server in your data room, then that transit should be encrypted as well. Okay, the second or the third is organized. We want it to be, we said we want it to be secure. Second item is organized. And that's, taking things, dividing it into drives, folders, subfolders, and files. There's an image here on the right of the screen that I pulled off. We're all used to this sort of Windows look on what's happening. And this gets mimicked in cloud file services as well. And part of that organization assumes that you're managing permissions, but can also include things like naming conventions and metadata. And we'll delve into naming conventions and metadata in a little bit more detail. Not too much because they're not overwhelmed, but effectively having guidance or policies around naming conventions makes it easier for people to locate information. So we'll talk about that as searchable. And metadata, well, it can be limited in some environments. Different tools for file services have different capabilities. Metadata is information other than the actual content of the file or the name of the file that let you categorize, organize, and find information. So for example, we offer a metadata service, a file management service that sits on top of Google Drive called AODocs, where you can actually create database fields and tie them to documents and set additional types of document types. So you can say, this Google Doc is a proposal, this Google Doc is an invoice, and those document types will then have additional fields that when you save the file, you'll be queried for to organize and create effectively a document management system or a database that lets you search, manage, organize, and collate your documents. And so naming conventions we'll talk about for searchability. Metadata is really when you need more sophisticated file management. Third in the acronym is accessible. Clearly, local drives provide local access and can provide local access not only to files on the local drives, but in the cloud or elsewhere as well. Your files might be on on-premise servers, network access storage, or storage area network devices. Here, your access is very different. Here, your access is going to be by local area network, wired or wireless. And if you're out of the office to get to those on-premise assets, you're going to need to go in remote. And that might be a VPN from your laptop into the company network. It might be connecting your laptop to a desktop or laptop that's on the network in a remote desktop, go to my PC type situation. Or there are services that will take what you have on your on-premise servers and mirror them to a cloud service that you can access from anywhere by going from your laptop up to the cloud. And that's different than some of the regular sync and share services. This is really just a gateway, if you will. The third location for data is going to be in a cloud server service. And this could be Microsoft 365, OneDrive, or SharePoint files or Teams. It can be Google My Drive or shared drives there. It could be desktop, Dropbox for Business, or Box.net. And typically, you access the file either from your web browser or client app. Many now offer a local agent or a locally installed app that lets you sync and share data, also lets you map from your local drive up, so that cloud service looks like an extension of your local computer. And for many cloud services now, you have application integration. So for example, there's certain versions of Adobe that are designed to connect directly to your Google Docs profile and account, and where you can save to Google Drive the same as you can to a local drive without having to have any external connection or external mapping between the two. Next up is protected. You want to protect your access. We've talked about a little bit. User identity management, encryption at rest and at motion is protection. You want business rules. You want to actually have in writing who can do what with which files. Who can do what with which. I love that saying, so that you understand when someone comes on board or someone changes roles in the company, what permissions they should be given and what permissions should be taken away. And protecting your data means that it's backed up and you're able to recover it so that you can get back to the right version at the right time, should the unexpected happen. And even with the best antivirus, even with the best third-party apps, there's always a risk, even in the cloud, of data being damaged or lost. And finally, searchable, because searching is knowing, and searchable means you know where to look. You can leverage file names and types. You can search content, and even better, you can do context-sensitive searches in some of the systems. And so those are the things we're looking for in our file services. So what's your first step? Your first step is to pick a file service. I sound a little, animated here. It's because I am, because we walk into small businesses and we find 3. The average number of cloud file servers used by small businesses is 3. That means companies that are paying for Microsoft 365, which has multiple types of file services embedded with it, are also paying for Dropbox accounts or Box.com accounts or Ignite accounts, or other CenterStack accounts or other services where they're storing, sharing, syncing files. And that costs money. It makes it difficult to manage your assets because your informational assets in those files, and it can create a risk. And so we don't really love shadow IT. And if you have a file service, our suggestion is you use it. You use it as much as possible. You get rid of other file services that are cloud-based, and whenever possible, you eliminate on-premise file servers to use that file service. So when you have a file server, whether it's Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, you've got an environment that is secured, accessible, and protected. Now there's an asterisk next to protected because both Microsoft and Google work on the shared responsibility model, meaning they provide a fundamental level of backup and recovery that guarantees the availability of the system and your working environment. What they don't guarantee is that you can recover a file that you delete. You're responsible for managing your own permissions, your own organization, and your own ability to recover files that are damaged or lost due to system errors other than theirs, and sometimes even theirs, and human action. And so protected there, we still need to talk about having backup recovery service for files in the cloud and a file service in the same way that you have backup and recovery for files, hopefully, on any of your on-premise or end-user devices. And so where we need to focus here is being searchable and being organized, because that's totally up to us as the users of Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. And both of them have comparable levels of service here. Personal space, you've got OneDrive in Microsoft and My Drive in Google Workspace. Individual users are allocated storage. It could be per user, sometimes it's aggregated across the domain. That's great, but the end user controls the permissions, the organization, the hierarchy, how they name files. It's all up to them. They decide when and if files are shared with whom and how. And that can include externally, which can produce security risks for your business. That's a topic, whole other topic for another webcast. They both offer shared space services. Most people are aware of shared drives within Google Workspace, but Google Sites can be used to set up file cabinets as well. In fact, that's often a way to create a client portal to share files with your clients. In shared space, in 365, the direction is Teams. Now, interestingly enough, the file storage in Teams is driven behind the scenes by SharePoint file services, which also lets you use SharePoint and have a website to access those files. You can also set up a file structure within the groups construct, although that's much less prevalent and much less popular mechanism. Teams is the direction, and with Microsoft is putting the emphasis on development, that's where we're starting to see most of our file shared spaces evolving, and it's quite honestly the most efficient at this point. And oftentimes, in most cases, the most effective way to do that file sharing. Now, both shared drives and Teams can share externally. You can block that at the macro, at the domain tenant level, but you can allow it and you can manage that. So with external sharing, yep, you've got multiple points where you can do external sharing as well. All depends on how you want to manage your environment. So the two services from a core file service are, pretty comparable. Different user interfaces, some different ways of managing permissions and techniques, but the capabilities are there in both the services. So once you pick your file service, one or the other, step 2 is think about your organization. How do you want it to be organized so we can meet that, right? And here we get into an actual discussion of creating some basic policies, or at least processes, that guide people, that you inform people in your organization and train them on. And we'll talk about education and training in a bit, about things like when is it appropriate to use personal storage versus shared storage, right? And you want to set people's expectations and potentially even craft a policy, right? So that if you're a project-based business, let's say an architecture firm, some of the work that you're doing is your work and your work alone. Even if it's part of a project, it might be more convenient to work in a personal space and move that work in snapshot form or certain milestones into the shared project folders. But for a lot of your work, you'll be collaborating with others. You'll want to be using that shared storage and have the permissions managed appropriately. And so given that, set expectations on when things can be personal storage and when things can be shared storage. Now with that, once you say where it's going to go, particularly in shared storage, how are you going to build your hierarchy? Is it going to be by department, by function, by roles and responsibility, by teams, by projects? You have a number of options, and these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So we've walked into businesses and said, you know what? Your finance department should have one, HR should have an environment because they need unique security. Your executive team should have a unique folder hierarchy because they have unique security. But after that, it's really about customer projects. And let's create a template for what a customer project folder hierarchy looks like. And each time you start a project, you create it. And when you're done with a project, and when you're ready, we can archive it off to some read-only storage at a lower cost. So you have it there for reference, but it's not frontline storage. And so there's a lot of flexibility there. Permissions, you have to decide if you're just looking at top tier and let it inherit down, or you're going to have 2 or more tiers of permissions. The deeper you go, the more granular the more robust you can be in some respects. But it's said that each level deep you go in managing folder hierarchy permissions, it's an exponential growth. So having a to the top level and one level, so you have 2 levels, is double the work of just top level. Going to a 3rd level, your 2 level deeps, it's 4 times the work, right? And so there we talk about organizing, and then processes. And processes get into when do you create hierarchies, when do you alter permissions based on the life cycle of the information in those hierarchies, when do you groom information out, when might you relocate that information to some other type of storage or archive. You want to think through those processes ahead of time as you organize, because it's how you're going to operate and maintain the system. The other thing we look at is server and network integration. If you have systems that need to run on premise and they're generating files and data, how are you going to get that data up into the cloud? How are you going to get it into your primary file service? And what type of integration do you want? Maybe it's sync and share, maybe it's snapshot and grab. There are a couple of different techniques. Similarly with your PC laptop integration, do you really need to sync and share to the laptop? That can push a lot of data down to that local hard drive, or is a mapped access sufficient? Although that does require, with some capabilities of offline document editing in both Google Workspace and Microsoft 365, mapped access generally requires that you're connected to the internet. So what's your operating environment? How are your remote workers working? What do they need? What do they really need local versus not? That's your PC laptop integration. And so we looked at mapped access. I sort of want to show a couple of things. We talked the difference between sync and share and having this mapped access. When we looked at mapped access in Microsoft OneDrive, it's on the settings page. It's files on demand, save space, and download files only as you use them. So effectively, you can browse your entire cloud environment that you're connected to in OneDrive, and that can be more than one account. And the only time you bring files down is when you need them. So when you go to open a file and you're working with the desktop version of Word or PowerPoint, the file's on your local hard drive, you're editing it, it's saving it locally, it's immediately syncing back to the cloud, but you get the performance boost of not going over the wire. Same thing when we stream files from Google. The files are stored in the cloud only. We've got a virtual drive on the computer that gives us access while we're working on it. So Microsoft OneDrive is more of a cache than Google Drive, but it's the same concept. And when you look at a snapshot of my PC, and yes, I've whited some stuff out for privacy because this is a real snapshot of my laptop, you can see that I've got, from the Google side, 3 letter drives mapped, H, T, and G. And I've got multiple, because I have multiple OneDrive accounts for myself personally, for the company, for some volunteer work I do for my local community. I've got multiple OneDrive available under quick access under this PC in the Explorer browser. What mapped access does is it makes my cloud file service look and feel like either local disk or network storage. And I can access it from using pretty much any application that's running locally on my laptop. Step 3, you've picked your file service, you've thought about your organization, you've created the hierarchy. Now, searchability. And this is where we get into the things that people don't like. In searchability, we really start, again, organizations and permissions come into play, right? But now we get into things like naming conventions, and including components in the name that make them easier to find, such as customer account or project titles or codes, the type of file. So, every proposal should say proposal. You have, the word proposal in the title, for example. Also, just encouraging or requiring people to put dates in a sortable format. Knowing if you do 4-digit year, -2-digit month, -2-digit day, you can actually reliably sort files, if that's the start of the file, by the date stamp that you put on the file for that version. And so there are a number of options that make it easier to search and easier to sort information. Additionally, in most of cloud file services, most files, the content will be searchable. And so people will often put important keywords now in headers or footers or on title pages, things of that nature, so that if you're looking for the proposal for XYZ company and you search for proposal XYZ company, potentially in the title, because of your naming conventions, but maybe on the title page of the document will be the words proposal and XYZ company. It'll make you easier to find when you do your search. And in both Microsoft 365 and in Google Docs now, when you're working in those environments, you have version history and version control. You have the ability to name and tag versions with specific names or version numbers. Now, you can get more complicated. As I said, there are third-party products you can bring into the environment that let you add other file attributes and can give you the ability not only to improve searchability, but effectively create a document base, a docubase. And so there's a number of ways. And of course, when you think about searchability, you have to extend that to your server or network integration, your PC laptop integration as well. The other thing that can make things searchable is templates. And templates are available both in Microsoft 365. You've had templates in Office since almost the beginning. In Google Workspace, you have the ability to create your own templates as well. There are templates that come into play that they offer as well that you can use. That's mostly about style. But creating your own templates, you do a couple of things for your business. And this is an important aspect of spring cleaning, if you will, because it's the going forward, right? You do the spring cleaning, we organize, we'll talk about migration and permissions. We've talked about that. Great. Now it's up and running. How do you keep it going forward? And one of the things is by leveraging templates, you can ensure there's a consistent look and feel and structure to your documents, because templates give you not only styles and formats, but can manage sections and even include default content, whether it's outline, a standard outline for certain types of documents, default sample or boilerplate text that you want in documents that either you edit or you send out as is, and even putting search terms, things you might be looking for in titles and headings or the headers and footers to make sure they're there. Okay, and so by using templates, you can actually improve searchability as well as assist in organization. Okay, now you can move on to adoption, right? And for adoption, we're really talking about, how do you get from point A to point B? You've got files, you've got your 3 cloud file services, you've got files on your laptops, maybe still on a file server, or you're using file space on an application server in your office. How do you get from point A to point B? And there are really 3 major steps. The first, define the organization, access, and permissions. We've talked about that. Who has access to what? What do you want people to be able to do with each file based on the role and responsibility of the department? How are you going to organize it? What's going to be personal space? What's going to be in the shared space moving forward? The next step is you actually have to migrate, right? It's not enough to set it up and say, okay, we're going to follow this. Let's actually move the files into a single system of record. Now, again, if you have Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, you have the file service that you need. Very few companies, in our experience, fewer than 5% of companies need a second cloud file service. And in those instances, it's a pretty unique situation. They've got a large client that mandates the use of a specific service and wants a direct connection, very rare, or you've got unique document type, storage, or sharing requirements that can be met using the file services within 365 or Google Workspace, but not as efficiently or as effectively as they could be. And so pharmaceutical development companies doing R&D who have to maintain file services that conform to FDA standards in certain ways may find certain aspects of that easier in a third-party service than Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, even though they can meet all those requirements within those environments, right? So very few instances where you need that third-party service. So get all of your files into that single system of record. The next part, and this is the part that tends to get mixed, or missed often, is you're moving or you're preparing to migrate. Part of the migration is actually configuring your PCs and laptops and other user devices to use the new infrastructure, right? So this is where you go with Google Drive for desktop. This is where you put in the OneDrive client and program it. This is where you configure the Google or the Microsoft apps on your smartphones and on your tablets, so that when people go into the environment that they're going to work in, they are connected to the organization, the hierarchy that you're created. They're not waffling around, and they're not going to be tempted to put files. There are other things you can do on the PC side as well, as far as particularly with the Microsoft 365 environment, you can configure laptops so that all files at the desktop and in folders on the desktop, all files under My Documents for each user who touches that laptop, and any media files automatically get synced up to OneDrive, right? They call it a backup feature. It's really a sync feature, but it's a way to make sure that all of the data, or nearly all of the data, on a local device gets up into the cloud as part of your file service and manage it. You want to do that configuration. And the third step, which is almost always forgotten, is educate. And that's educating people about how you're organizing and what your expectations are for maintaining it, how the permissions are set, what are any naming conventions you want to follow, and then any processes you've created. So for example, I talked about an architecture firm earlier. They have a process that says when you're onboarding a client, this one happens to be on a Microsoft environment, so they set up a team in Microsoft Teams for that project. Key personnel from the client are added as guests. There are multiple streams with permissions so that the guests can see what they're supposed to, but then there are working areas, there's file storage areas. They integrate a planning tool and a project management tool. They integrate a media library. There are a whole number of ways that there's a process. The project's ongoing. Customer signs off, says, yay, we're done. The project's complete. They then archive that team, right? They don't, if they didn't, then employees would come in and over a period of a few years, they'd have dozens of teams that are inactive on their screen. Here they actually, move the files, they snapshot the work, it's moved to an archive, everyone has read-only access, so it can be referred to or referenced for future work if need be. But they created this process, and you want to educate your employees on what that process is going to be and their role in it, so they understand that file management isn't just about individual files, it's about maintaining the whole system so it's most usable. And so there's some critical success factors when you make a big change like this. And this is part of adoption, an understanding that when you look at the impact in the change, and we want to improve user productivity, that's part of the reason for doing a spring file cleaning, if you will, and spring cleaning your files. But certainly when you make a change, it's a typical launch. Yeah, you get to a point, you do the launch, and you're going to have an negative impact on productivity as people adapt to the new system. And over time, you'll return back to the status quo. And that's great. However, if you take some effort to do that education, the user productivity can actually grow. And so that you really, to gain the benefits of the changes that we're talking about making in spring cleaning and organizing, securing, etc., having processes in place, if you have training and education is the why we're doing it and how it's going to help them do their job. Training is the clicks and drags they need to do to make it work. And then support when they have questions. If you do that type of program with these changes, you can actually significantly improve individual and team productivity. And that's the ultimate goal. So when we talk about spring cleaning in our files and moving to a single system of record, the downside is that short-term cost, right? There's planning, there's migration work, there's education, there's change, there are going to be people resistant to change. Weigh that against the pros. Improved efficiency, individual and team productivity, easier collaboration without risking security, direct cost savings. You'll be paying for fewer cloud services, and you should be buying less hardware and software to run your business. And then there's indirect cost savings, where we've seen, for example, we worked with a consulting company in getting their file service organized and secure because they were able to reuse components of proposals and new proposals. Their turnaround for a new client to issue a proposal went from 3 to 5 days down to 4 to 5 hours, which was a huge improvement in efficiency and an indirect cost savings for them. And so what's your action plan? Start out with an assessment. Look at your current file services and practices. Are there obvious areas for improvement? Is there a desire to improve? How might it impact your business? Think about that, assess it. If you can, quantify it. If not, at least qualify, so that you can define the value of proposition and look at the benefits of moving forward and making that short-term investment for that long-term gain. but also understand the impact of inaction. And we've worked with small companies where we've talked and they've said, it'll be beneficial for us to do it, but where we are now, it's a lot of work that we don't really have, that there's never a good time to do. But then you look and you say, okay, if you wait 6 months, given the nature of your business, the amount of data we're going to have to reposition and migrate or restructure or rethink is going to be 50% or 100% greater. So why not do it while the data set's smaller? All of these types of decisions, it's one example, many types of decisions, value proposition, the benefits of moving forward versus inaction. And then we say, yeah, plan, manage the change. Do it in phases if you have to, but execute. And so I've covered a lot of ground about spring cleaning. So I want to open the floor up for Q&A. If you haven't done so, open that questions window and shoot me a question there. If you're not ready to ask your question, our company contact information is on the screen. My personal contact information as well, my phone number and my email address. I will tell you when I'm busy, I don't answer the phone. And when you leave a voice message, I'm horrible about listening to them and responding. The best way to reach me is by email. I don't have an assistant. No one screens my messages. An email comes to me. I'll either answer it or I will let you know that I'm delegating it to someone to answer it on my behalf who might be better able to get you a quick turnaround to your question. So feel free to reach out to us in general or to me personally. We'll get your questions answered. At this point in the webcast, I want to thank those who are watching us on demand. We typically end the recording before we head into the Q&A session based on the feedback we've gotten from folks who watch our webcasts on demand. So for those of you watching the recording, I want to thank you again for taking the time to do so. And feel free to contact us with any questions, concerns, ideas that you have in mind. If there's a resource we can provide, let us know. Thanks and have a great day.